subscribe, and ring the bell. Support the channel. Stay strong.
Hey guys, Paul here with my good friend Shah, and this is Repairing the Manosphere. We've done, I think, about 12 of these now, a dirty dozen. And tonight we're going to be covering a few things. We've got some questions that Shah and I both are going to try to answer. But first we wanted to just sort of go over a little bit. This is the first time Shah's been back since we had the engagement with Rollo and Michael Sartain, and wanted to cover a couple of things about that. First of all, let me just say welcome, Shah, and let you say hello to everybody.
Oh, thanks, Paul. It's great to be back, and I'm feeling pretty good. So, yeah, we can touch base a little bit on that fun that we had on our last episode. So.
Yeah, there's something that come out of that. I mean, that episode was, I mean, if we're going to be honest, there were parts of it that were a bit of a shit show. There was hostility. I mean, and it started with online taunting, which is not a good place to begin a discussion, I think, for most people. You antagonize each other online, then bring it into a live discussion. It's like, oh, wow, are we civil here? Or are we going to carry this on from where we left off? And unfortunately, I think we all carried on from where we left off a little bit. Okay, guilty as charged. That's fine. I'll live with it. There was a couple of things, though, that didn't come up in that I wanted to say, and I know Shah has some to add to this, too. But looking back, while I do not agree at all, I think that Shah and I both were on target very much about our thoughts on Rollo's work and Michael Sartain's work and what they do. I don't think I acknowledged a couple of things strongly enough. One, I actually do appreciate very much the work Rollo has done, bringing information, red pill information to guys. I mean, again, I'm not a huge fan of what direction he went with it, but in terms of being successful and bringing a different perspective to men, I think he's done a stand-up job, and I appreciate it. I also, being very unfamiliar with Michael Sartain's work, and again, I don't agree with a lot of this. We're going to see a couple of clips to address that here in a moment. But I could have and probably should have at least acknowledged, that he is providing a better alternative than the blue pill. And I also want to tip my hat to him for his service to the country. I think that's worth mentioning and worth honoring, regardless of my differences with him. This guy did serve his country in some pretty hot situations. I think that's worth acknowledging and appreciating. Anyway, Shah, you want to add anything to that?
Well, yeah, I'll just say, I mean, I definitely agree with everything you said. And even in the debate, towards the end of that, I did tell them that I respect their work. I mean, I have 2 of Rollo's books. And, I kind of look at the space and the manosphere as a whole as something that have gone through, I guess, different stages. And especially way back when, men didn't have a lot to go on, and the space really allowed people to compare notes. And I kind of see it as going through these stages of increasing complexity and sophistication. So I do respect a lot of what they do, and have to acknowledge that. But like you said, as it's kind of gone on, there have been some things that we disagree with. But they're worthy of our respect, I'd say.
Yeah, I think so too. And if we ever get them back on again, we'll try to do a little bit better job of getting an actual discussion about these issues. One of the things that Rollo brought up, and I think he's quite correct, the world really is starting in places like Canada and Europe, but the world is really starting to gun for the manosphere. There are people out there who desperately want to silence us. They see this stuff catching on. They know how powerful it is, especially in the minds of young men. And they're desperate to cling to the old narrative. They don't want anything else coming back. So they're going after all of us. We're all in the same boat along those regards. I would respectfully suggest to Rollo, just to point out, the only 2 real interactions I've had with him ever have both been him trolling me on the internet. He came out years ago. We had Janice Fiamingo, a superstar as far as I'm concerned, on this topic, a brilliant writer, a brilliant thought leader on this subject. And she spoke at one of our conferences, and Rollo trolled me, I think it was on Twitter, about having a woman speak and how lame that was. And then this last time with him coming in to a thread that I hadn't addressed him on, telling me that I was a fan of Michael Sartain's work, and kind of a troll there. So I would just respectfully submit to Rollo that if that's sincere, that perhaps a little more cooperative communication with other people in this space would be in order. Just take that for what it's worth, Rollo. But in the end, these guys are doing a lot of good. We're going to talk a little bit now about how some of that good could be better. You know, one of the things that came up in the discussion, and we didn't focus on it long, but we did address it, is that the techniques that the sort of PUA/game segment of the Manosphere employ, the focus of their work, absolutely tends to be an attractor for dysregulated, dysfunctional women, and it repels healthy, centered women. I think that's, I don't think that's really in much dispute. And we want to play you a couple of clips that turned out to be kind of funny, given the subject that we were talking about. So, Brian, if you could play the first one.
For the Playboy model notorious for allegedly scamming sugar daddies, Abdel Levy is facing new charges today of stealing from another rich guy, and it looks like her billionaire fiance has had enough.
Would you be my wife?
Last Valentine's Day, 65-year-old Stephen Klubeck, who made his fortune selling vacation timeshares and once ran for governor of California, proposed to Levy after just 6 months of dating. They sent out this save the date notice, but now in a statement to Inside Edition, his rep says, I can confirm the engagement is off and there will be no wedding or marriage. As if she needed more bad news, today Levy finds herself behind bars after surveillance video emerged of her allegedly breaking into a Tesla Cybertruck and stealing a Rolex watch and Louis Vuitton sunglasses.
I felt violated.
This wealthy businessman, who asks that we call him only by his first name, Oscar, says that's his.
Okay,
That's the end of the clip.
Yeah, that's the end of the clip. Thank you. And this story gets a little bit better here in a minute, as you'll see. But when I was talking about this with these guys, this is sort of what I was poking at. If you look at this sort of plastic-looking synthetic woman, I mean, that's the kind of woman I can see from a mile off and tell she's no good. And she certainly proved it. But, you know, she's run in some other circles. She's been attracted not just to the guys she ripped off and to this one rich guy who eventually got wise and dumped her, but she's also hanging out with another crowd. And we're going to see that in this next clip, Brian, if you'd go ahead and play it.
And she stayed with us for one night. When she left is when we found out that she had taken some of my belongings.
She was already facing charges of stealing from other wealthy guys. And during this podcast, shot in Las Vegas,
At the end of the day, all I want is get married and have kids.
she disappeared from the show for 20 minutes. The host believes she used the opportunity to rifle through the handbags of her fellow guests.
I think she probably went through the girls' purses and stuff in the green room.
Wow.
Inside Edition caught up with Levy back in April when she pled not guilty to the original charges, and she cut a glamorous figure, but this time she was held without bail in prison scrubs. Quite the change in circumstances for this once high-flying beauty. Levy faces up to.
Well, what can I say? This is what I was talking about. And I love the line. I'm glad they got that on camera with her saying she just wanted to settle down and get married and have babies. Yes.
Selling the dream.
But
It almost worked with the billionaire, too.
Yeah, it almost did. And there's no way that she would have divorced him and ripped him off for millions of dollars. That would have never happened. And I think this is a point that we're trying to make. The red pill space has a lot of great information for guys, and even and sometimes especially the stuff that Rollo does, I think is very relevant and very informative about that. But the discernment that's missing here, I think, is a real problem, and I think that is what is established almost like two different camps in the manosphere. You've got guys who have taken the information and said, how do I get this girl in the red bikini? And, maybe come with instructions on how to lock up your watch instead of leaving it in your car. But this is sort of what we're talking about here, folks, is that there is something more than chasing skirts that is involved here. And I think men miss out on that to their own detriment. It hurts them when they think just in terms of securing sexual access, of securing female attention and approval. And it hasn't done those guys a lot of good. I mean, how many stories are out there right now from guys we'll never hear about who got ripped off, who got taken advantage of? I mean, I get them in my practice all the time. But this is happening to millions of guys, and it's happening. It even happened to Rollo and Michael. They had this thief on their show, and she's an accessory to make it look like a work of success. I mean, when you have a table full of hot women, I mean, I don't personally think she was very hot. I don't go for that look at all. But when you are surrounded by women that are stereotypically pretty and highly sexual, you're going to attract a big male audience. And I think there needs to be questions asked about what you do. What are you providing to that audience that is actually going to benefit their lives? Shah, do you want to add anything to that?
Just watching that, that reminds me of something I've discussed on my own podcast. I have this thing called the Matador metaphor, and I think guys can get so comfortable just when you get some wins, with women like this. But the longer you're out there, if you're planning to make this a permanent thing where you constantly expose yourself to this, especially with these kinds of tactics and this kind of ethos, you're going to attract these kinds of people. And that clip of it on their show, it's almost like a kind of microcosm or a metaphor of what it can be like. I mean, even just on their podcast, they've managed to attract someone that robbed people on there that day. So, there needs to be another way of thinking about this. And I think we kind of touched on that in the debate and this distinction between short term and long term, and also versus using a PUA ethos to attract this kind of dysfunction and use these type of manipulative tactics versus something that's more long term and more of a pair bond that makes sense and is more stable. So that's what makes me remember.
What serves men? What actually serves them in their life, their own interests, their own well-being. And the reason that I started this podcast is because I feel like the predominant audience in the manosphere is not focused at all on what actually serves their well-being. And look, I get it, especially if you're like 18 to 24, you're not shallow. If all you think about is women, you're biologically normal. I mean, for that phase in life, you walk around, a lot of men do anyway. I was totally obsessed with women and sex. That's all I really want to direct my energies to. But save for that age group, once you start getting into your later 20s, early 30s, and the rest of the span of a man's life, your priorities change and you begin to recognize your vulnerabilities, especially if you've already been through a divorce in the family courts. You start figuring out, well, success with women isn't measured by whether or not she gets into bed or whether or not she's willing to be in a long-term relationship with me or get married or anything else. It is, yeah, I think, incumbent on everybody in this space, and I urge Michael to consider this, and Rollo, and anybody else doing this work, that men do have vulnerabilities. The family court system, the false accusations, paternity fraud. We go down the list here all the time of things that can happen. And so try to imagine what it's like if all these realities are out there. And look, this girl is not like a rarity uh, at all. There are millions upon millions. I mean, I think Bill Bird said we have an epidemic of gold digging whores. And got a lot of shock for saying that, but we do have that going on. So if your focus is on just measuring your success by sexual conquest, and you look at the actual quality of women that are available out there, there's a mismatch there that we need to address. So with that in mind, we're doing a little bit of a thought experiment tonight. We've compiled with the help of AI. We're going to use AI for our questions tonight. What I did was I prompted it. I gave it some material. I gave it the transcript of the Rollo and Sartain podcast. I gave it some of my other work and asked it to formulate hard questions that would be challenging for Shah and I to answer. Some of them aren't so challenging. Some of them are kind of challenging, but it did come up with good questions, and we're going to roll into those now. And since I've got the questions in my hand and I'm happen to be on the mic at the moment, I get to hit Shah with the first one.
Okay. All right, bring it on.
Bring it on. Okay, question one. What is the strongest thing the Manosphere has done for men over the last 10 to 15 years?
Well, I think they have at least awakened men to how bad the deal is, so to speak, at least the one that came prior to a lot of this, maybe what you'd consider your standard blue pill stuff. And I think it's also given men a space to really be able to come together and at least share notes. And this is something that's taken some time. Maybe it's not always been done in the best of ways, but at least there's a space that exists for that. So then men are starting to be able to recognize patterns and start to understand things better. So when I think 10 to 15 years back, I mean, oh God, that would be about like what, 2011-ish. And I, for me,
how old are you? About 10, 12?
Well, I was just getting out of college then. And what's interesting is that I actually found the subreddit. So there used to be, I think there still is, a red pill subreddit, and that came around 2013 or 14-ish. And
it was actually 12.
2012. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So right around the time I graduated. Probably would have been nice while I was still in college, but that's another thing. But there was something I think that was very positive about it, and it allowed men to be able to have a space to voice things that the rest of the culture, I think, really did a good job of making men feel like they couldn't do. So that I think was one of the strongest things it did. And from there, men being able to talk and have a space to talk and compare notes, I think a lot of good has come out of that, to be able to recognize how whatever the old deal was just not working anymore, if it even worked back then. So it highlighted a lot of things like the romantic ethos and how that was something that was more, fiction or fairy tale than anything. So I think there was a lot of good things there.
I got to agree with you. I think it's kind of a two-edged sword. Actually, I thought this was a simple question at first, and actually I think it's a little more nuanced than I gave it credit for to begin with. I agree that one of the things that the Manosphere has done over the last 10 or 15 years is give men a place to identify in others their sense of frustration and anger about what's happened in their lives. Unfortunately, and look, I'm totally guilty of this, a lot of that comes through in sort of the rage porn part of the manosphere where we talk about the double standards. If women do this, they get away with it, and that's wrong. And we challenge society to look at this, but some of it does devolve into sort of victim mentality, and I think in staying stuck in anger. But at the same time, I think it's been absolutely necessary. If you don't let people talk about what's hurt them or made them angry without shaming and humiliating them, then they just stuff it and they go act it out in other ways in life. And that's not a solution. So on this, I'm going to give the Manosphere pretty good marks. It put the truth on the table about what men's lives are like in ways that would have never been permitted before the internet. It just wouldn't happen. I never remember, and I go back, I became red pill in 93 with the myth of male power. There was really no internet to speak of at the time. And I couldn't have these conversations with anybody I knew. It just didn't exist. And then the internet comes online, this little concept called the First Amendment. I think we owe, I don't care what you think of the guy personally, but I think we owe Elon Musk a big debt for the fact that he took over X and made it a free speech platform. Because without it, I mean, Facebook's not free. We don't have other platforms. The online men's movement, the red pill space, is basically X for the most part. And I think we owe Musk a debt of gratitude for that. Okay, you want to shoot the next question at me, Shah?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I'll go ahead and run down to the next one. What truths did the Manosphere tell men that mainstream culture still refuses to tell them?
For me, it's that they're getting a bad deal. That literally the whole romantic ethic, the way marriage is set up, the way the state's involved, the expectations on men, the gynocentric expectations especially, and even more than the gynocentric expectations, the expectation that you're supposed to be willing to die for better corporate oil interest, those sort of things. I don't think, almost lost my train of thought here. I don't think the mainstream wants us to talk about any of this. They just don't want to have any part of men acknowledging the bad deal. And you still see this on social media a lot. How desperate people are to come in and shame and shut down conversations. And it's kind of funny to watch it fail over and over again. They come in and say, no real man would talk this way. And then the next thing you know, there's 5 more guys in the conversation talking that way. I think the mainstream narrative, we're beginning to see the very beginning of its death right now.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, by and large, I think they're still trying to sort of paint the whole space as just these angry men, who can't get any, and they're just frustrated about that. And they do refuse to acknowledge that the deal is incredibly lopsided. So there's a lot of gaslighting going on there. For the prior question, you'd mentioned the rage sort of aspect of it, and back then, what I remember is they used to call it a rage phase. Like, you take the red pill, and there would naturally be a rage phase. But the positive thing about it was that you had a group of men that you can express this stuff with, and they did a lot to get men out of the rage phase, and that was a very positive thing. I think more recently, especially when you think of like YouTube and getting views and stuff like that, they do a lot to keep men in the rage phase because I think it makes more dollars that way in some ways.
Yep.
So what's needed now, I think, is some kind of blueprint or some type of push to, what happens after the rage phase, and where do you go? But when it comes to mainstream culture, they are still refusing to acknowledge these very legitimate grievances coming from the men's side. Or it's usually, at least what I notice, is it's still in the men need to step up category. It's mostly,
Man up.
because of men. Yeah, men aren't keeping up or whatever it happens to be, and they're refusing to look at why are a large contingent of men walking away in the first place. So when it comes to the mainstream culture, I think they're still doing their best to kind of patch up or put duct tape over this whole thing. In some ways, I've always thought of this metaphor over the years, and I've always seen the manosphere, the red pill space, as kind of like the bastard child of the more conservative side of things. And as it's growing, it's become kind of an unruly teenager, and they're having trouble sort of keeping that under the wraps, but it's growing bigger and stronger. Eventually,
Yes,
it's gonna be
it's
right there.
individuating, and
Yes.
that's not good news for the tradcons. Afraid so. To touch a little bit on what you were talking about, I agree entirely that, the thing about the red pill rage is that the anger that drives that is a part of a grief process.
Mhm.
And if you take sexual politics out of the equation and you ask any psychologist, is this anger that people feel when they grieve, is it necessary? Is it necessary to express it? Boy, they'll tell you, yes, absolutely. You've got to be able to express that. If you shut it down, it'll slow down the grieving process. It'll keep you stuck. And again, it will have you acting out. Um, Men, when they learn the truth, are having to unlearn everything that they've ever believed in their lives. They're having to let go of their very identity in many ways. And they look at themselves, and one of the first reactions is going to be anger. Why did I do this? Why did I simp all those years? God, I know I had 2 or
Oh,
3
yeah.
years of just total self-recrimination and anger at myself for what I had done out of ignorance. And that was a natural part of getting me through more of the grief process so that I could actually, deal with this stuff internally and move to a place of healing so that I don't have to be in anger all the time. But I do think that we have to consider that there are new guys coming in this space all the time, and they're going to need to express that anger. So
Yeah.
to some degree, I hope some of the rage porn stays out there. I hope it's always there, sort of as a lighthouse, because being angry was what first caught my attention. When I read Meth and Male Power, I was furious by the time I finished the book.
I can just corroborate a lot of that even when I think of my own experience. Like you said, when you first understand and start to process some of this, you can go back and just remember everything. Like stuff from years ago will pop into your mind and you'll be able to understand what happened there.
It never
But
stops.
yeah, you do have to process it in a way. And both sides of the mainstream, whether it's on the right or the left, I think they're just heavily invested in keeping men as a utility, and they don't want to acknowledge that as far as the rage and anger goes is actually legitimate. Like you say, it makes sense, but they will try to divert that in kind of weird ways or try to divert it back into whatever their conception of what they think is masculinity, basically. And that goes for both tradcons and the other side.
Yep.
So they keep trying to push back on this so that they don't have to come to terms with possibly rethinking how they see masculinity and how men's behavior patterns should be in terms of the culture.
I agree entirely, and I can never help but notice that when it comes to the male utility thing, and this is one of the several criticisms I have for the modern manosphere, which we should probably define at this point, or try to define a little bit. I see it as tradcons, I see it as MRAs, I see it as PUAs, I see it as the game community, the masculinity coaches, dating coaches, all the success coaches, all these things that are geared to attract men. Ultimately, I would have to venture that 80% of them are wired to create better utilities of men. Uh, that's what they do. And that is at the core of the problem. Um, so
Yeah. Well, I would say, yeah, I mean, I guess if I could distill it down in some if you'd agree with this, but it's okay. Women's standards are up here. They're this delusional. John from It's Complicated has a question he asked on one of his shows. I can't remember exactly how it goes, but basically what he's trying to suss out with that question is where on the one hand we're saying the women's standards are delusional, but on the other hand, the people in the space are doing their best to coach or even shame men into meeting those same delusional standards. So something is off here in some ways.
Well, again, I think it's largely manipulation of the male sex drive. That basically there's a part of all of us that are wired for nookie, and
Yeah.
it's always if we're straight, that's going to be the case,
Mhm.
and that's relatively easy to tap into. You go back into at least 100 years of guys advertising He-Man courses and things like that, all about getting pumped up and pleasing the ladies. And the new Manosphere, there's a lot of that mentality in there.
Yeah. Well,
Go
it's
ahead.
important to point out the romantic ethos's involvement in that. So it's like so long as that's there, there's this push for how do you cater to, what she wants and putting her up on a higher pedestal or something and then trying to cater to that where it's already lopsided at this point. So there is aspects of the manosphere that still teach men to live in that romantic ethos and to cater to that when you really zoom out and look at it.
And I'm gonna, at the risk of giving too liberal a pat on my own back and a pat on yours, Shah. I think this is we've only recently in the manosphere, at least in this corner of it, really begun to examine the romantic ethic. We've talked about gynocentrism for years, and that's a term that most people in the red pill space are familiar with. But in terms of really critiquing the romantic ethic and looking at the history of romance and how it spread through the culture, this is actually something relatively new that we're exploring here. And I'm finding it really informative. Gynocentrism is such a sort of off-base term. If I talk to the average person on the street and ask them what they think of gynocentrism, they're going to be like, gyno what?
Yeah.
That's it. But if I ask a person about romance, at least they have a model in their head of how that works. It's a word that is instantly relatable. And so I hope that we continue to talk less about gynocentrism and more about romance, because I think romance is the root of gynocentrism in Western culture.
I would even say, if you ask most normal people, like, what is romantic chivalry? Um, I don't think they understand it that deeply either. They might have some surface level stuff like, oh, well, it's holding open the door or something like that.
Oh yeah,
But
lighting cigarettes and 1950s Hollywood romantic comedies. I know
exactly.
that their notion of it is convoluted, but at
Yeah.
least that word means something to them, and you
Mhm.
can build on a little information. We'll say, oh well, how do you prove you're romantic? And then well, you pay for everything. Well, wait a minute,
Yeah.
your labor doesn't count. Uh, at least you
Exactly.
can roll into some kind of dialogue about this. Whereas with gynocentrism, as much as a big shout out to Peter Wright, I mean, his work is inspirational in that area.
Yeah.
But I do think it's time for us to move past that and into really understanding what this romantic code is with women and how much we blindly obey it without even knowing what we're doing, because it's powerful.
Yeah, and I'll say, hope I'm not belaboring this question too long, but I find it just really important. And this is where I spent so much time studying about the dowry and the dowry ethos prior to that, because it's helped me really highlight a lot of aspects of the romantic ethos because it's so diametrically opposed to it. And I didn't really have that before, even myself, with just kind of the regular stuff that was out there in the manosphere, other than some of the more common understandings of the blue pill and stuff like that. So I do think focusing on it and digging deeper into it is important.
Well, that's what we intend to do. And I know you've been doing it in your good work. And by the way, Shah's got a paper out that was published in New Male Studies. It is linked below in the description. I encourage you to read it, especially if you're an Evo Psych guy that believes biodeterminism is what has dictated unilateral female hypergamy in human society. Once you get your mind around the historical facts about this, you understand that hypergamy is a human trait and it's been practiced by both sexes throughout generations, and it only changed when we developed the romantic ethic. And now women have carte blanche to practice all the hypergamy they want shamelessly, and men who dare to say, well, I would like you to bring something to the table, get a what kind of man are you?
Exactly.
And we would like to see that change. I would love to see a lot more men saying, I don't know, what do you got?
Yeah, me too. That is one of my goals. I want to put that nerve back into men to have what they would say is the gall or the audacity. The paper is titled "How the Dowry System Checks Hypergamy." So please read it. There's references, there's sources, and I hope you guys enjoy it.
It actually, the dowry system and the way we conducted marriages throughout history prevented hypergamy being practiced just in women. It absolutely eradicated, I mean, before it ever started. Again, this is a new kid on the block, female hypergamy. It's not biogenetic and it is not new. It's relatively, in the scheme of the human race, it's a very, very recent development. Okay, rolling on. Do you think the manosphere has helped men understand women more clearly, or has it mostly given men a new vocabulary for old frustrations?
That's a bit of a challenging question for me. You know, in some ways, I know this. A lot of people, especially in the modern manosphere, will probably not want to hear this. I always looked at the red pill as it was presented, in terms of, on the forums, in at least the PUA side of it, which is what I was introduced to. I always saw it as a kind of half truth. And the reason I say that is because in some ways it can really make you think you understand all this stuff clearly. And the reason I say that is because you can go on there, look at the tactics, employ them, and actually see a difference in what you're doing when it comes to your interactions with women. But then at the same time, I feel like people can become very overconfident with that. Then it kind of leads you into this space where you're kind of on this hamster wheel of trying to appeal to the delusional standards we spoke about earlier, and you're still kind of living in this romantic ethic, basically, and you think that's the win. But there's actually there's more steps to walk out of that, to exit that, so that you're not living still in this kind of greater gynocentrism that you don't recognize. I know that's pretty convoluted, but it's a
I
tough
don't
one
think
for me
so.
to answer.
I get it. I think also I don't think it gave really men a new vocabulary for old frustrations. I don't think the old frustrations had a vocabulary. None to speak of. I mean, you weren't allowed to say, women are hypergamous and this is all about extracting resources from me and using me until I can't produce anymore and then getting rid of me. That wasn't a discussion you could have with people in the public. They would shut you down entirely. So what it came out as was happy wife, happy life, and little, just basically platitudes like that's just the way women are. And that's all Ben would say. I mean, that's all I remember growing
She's
up
always
with.
right, or
She's
something.
always right. But a real vocabulary to describe this stuff, I don't think happened commonly until the Manosphere. So I've got to give them a little boost for that.
Yeah.
'Cause it's definitely better than nothing. Any more on that, Shah?
That's all I got on that one.
Okay. How about you take on the next one?
Okay. Where does the Manosphere help men become more accountable, disciplined, and self-directed?
That's again a two-edged question. I think it's certainly, if you're in this sort of self-improvement end of the manosphere, the just lift bro type stuff, you develop discipline. I mean, if you're hitting the gym regularly, if you're watching what you eat, if you're taking care of yourself physically, even if you're doing something as inane and superfluous as looks maxing, you're at least developing some sort of discipline around that. And I think that's worthwhile until you start looking at the reasons why most people do it. I saw a tweet today. This guy went down the list. Men go to the gym because of vagina, and they work out because of vagina, and they eat better because of vagina, and they drink because of vagina, and they buy a new car because of vagina. And this list went all the way down. It makes you think the economy would probably collapse if men didn't stop dedicating all their resources to attracting women. Again, it's in the motivation there, but I think I'll give it a C, maybe for discipline development, because so much of the discipline is misguided. Shah?
Yeah, when I hear something like that, and they're pretty much putting all aspects of men's life for vagina, it's like in my mind, it's like how is that not gynocentric? That's incredibly gynocentric in my opinion. And I think with the manosphere, there certainly is this. I don't think anybody disagrees that self-improvement is, a good thing. Absolutely it is. I think most normal people who aren't depressed wake up every day and they're trying to make their situation better. I don't know. That's how I see it.
Okay.
And I think the manosphere does a good job of providing that as an option. I think it starts to become harder once you're up there. Where do you go from there? Then I think it can lead guys into more of a black pilled type of understanding, and it's like, well, everybody's bad, and this kind of thing. And I think where it goes to part of the question where it says self-directed, I think is important, because if it is still gynocentric or they're doing it for women, then I don't know if that's so much self-directed or about self-actualization. It's more so just trying to appeal externally to others. It's maybe wearing a mask or wanting to be way too consciously alpha or something, and because you're in fear of being beta instead of like just being your authentic self and having the courage to do that with proper, boundaries and values that you live by. So I think in a lot of ways, I think it gets men started on that, and I think there are good creators and coaches out there that help with that. But the danger is maybe really selling it too hard or shaming men so hard in order to sell some kind of dream that I call it the male Barbie standard. It's
Yep.
like this the same. It's kind of a mirror image of the Barbie standard for women that eventually collapsed in on itself because it just wasn't something that was viable for most women. And you kind of saw that, especially with like the whole Andrew Tate era, and there's a lot of spin-offs of him. And to me, it represented the same thing, and I think that can be a negative to men in some way.
This takes me back to partially to the conversation we had with Rollo and Sartain, because one of the key points of division, I think, was the manosphere that focuses on women's approval and attention versus guys that go MGTOW. I mean, it's the same basic information. You're getting the facts about women, about men, about sexual dynamics and the power play between the sexes. And you have one camp that turns that into, well, I'm going to get laid. And another camp that says, you know what, I'm going to respect myself and withdraw. I'm going to get away from this and start focusing on other things in my life. And no disrespect intended to the guys that, especially the younger guys who turn this into, I'm going to turn this into more sexual success with women. That's what I'm going to use this information for, versus the other guys. And it's why I don't want to really blame content creators for it, because I think it boils down to the individual character and morality of the man involved. If you're shallow and The only thing you care about is sex. And again, young guys, I'm not dissing on you for this. We've all been there. But if you're in your 40s, 50s, and you're still thinking about, I want to get that hottie at the convenience store, if that's your locus in life, if that's where you want to put your intention, versus a guy that says, you know what? I'm going to either walk away, I'm going to do the MGTOW thing completely and swear women off, or I'm just going to keep things very superficial with them and tend to my own life. Or if you're a guy that says, okay, I'm going to use this information that I have to screen ruthlessly women, and I'm going to do my best to find one that I'm compatible with and whose behavior isn't out of control and whose expectations are realistic and who actually brings something to the table. I think it's the individual character of the man that decides which direction he's going to go. If he's just based on sex, if that's all the approval he needs, hey man, have fun with it. But I do believe that more thoughtful, contemplative, and intelligent men take this information and do more than try to achieve sexual success. And that's up to the guy. That information is out there. And what men do with it often determines the quality of their life from that point forward. Because you can talk to Shah about his experiences in child support.
I was just thinking about that. That's exactly what was in my mind, especially when you mentioned about being, especially at those ages, but in a lot of ages. And it highlights something that you usually discuss, which is operating off of largely a PUA ethic and attracting a certain type, using certain techniques in order, and it's kind of filtering for a certain type of person. And I think the manosphere has a bit of myopia in this. And the reason I think I've always kind of been skeptical of it is because when I did work at the child support agency, I saw this happening to men so often. It's just, I don't want to sound like, I'm trying to, I don't know, throw a curse out there or something, but it is a matter of time if you keep doing this before you step in a fat pile of poo in one way or another. And, most men in the space, you even see it in the space with high up there content creators who sell themselves as understanding female nature and all this. They have scandals all the time popping up. So like you're saying, it goes to the character of the man. What their kind of retort to me is, well, none of these women exist. Where are you going to find that? And this is where I say they get blackpilled. But my challenge to them is like, hey, if you're actually this high status, high value man, and you're mingling in these upper social circles, like you can't leverage that to find someone from, a very decent family or old money family or wherever you got to go and get them to invest in what you two are doing. And for me, what that convinces me of is that they don't even know how to look for that or that they should be looking for that. They're so myopically focused on this specific ethic of being successful, quote unquote, with women that they don't even know that exists.
And I think we got to own it too. I mean, the manosphere did not create this, I want to say, lack of thoughtfulness about women and men. It's always been there. But I was alive before feminism was much of a thing, and I can tell you that men were blind about women that they were sexually attracted to. It's always been that way. They don't want to hear negative information, and it's not just the sexual attraction, it's romantic fulfillment, it's pair bonding, and men have just surrendered their discernment about this a long time ago with the romantic ethic. And I think the manosphere could do a lot better job at challenging that in their audience, challenging their audience to look at themselves and say, how much of your identity comes from this? And if most of your identity comes from a woman's approval, you're telling me you don't have an identity. You're telling me that it's all external, that you're looking for a mirror because you're unable to look inward. And I know that'll probably bother some guys, but that's the way I see it.
I absolutely 100% agree with that. And I think a lot of the trap is this tendency to want to walk into these understandings of masculinity that are more popular, and not having the courage to walk away from that, and having your own character and your own way of seeing that.
We have a formidable challenge, my friend.
Yeah, we do.
Afraid so. And I don't want to blame but my point is that I didn't want to blame the manosphere for a lot of that stuff. This is modern men under the romantic spell. This is the way they behave, they think, their decision making, their priorities, the way they get their identity. This has been basically injected into men from birth for the past couple of 100 years, and it's hard to overcome that. But I think with the help of the internet and a few good men, we're beginning to make some small amount of headway. Let's roll on to the next one, Shah. What's the next question?
Oh, okay. Where does the manosphere fail to move men beyond anger, grievance, or woman-focused analysis?
Literally everywhere. I mean, let's break them down: anger, grievance, and women focused. I just challenge the audience: think of the manosphere and how much of it is focused on those three areas. How much rage porn is there out there? How much grievance? How many times do you see a guy online saying you can't win with women? This is one of the things that just drives me out of my tree. When I hear a guy so defeated that he literally says you can't win an argument with a woman. I don't think I've ever lost an argument with a woman. You can win. And this is where I got to score the manosphere low. I mean, again, we need the rage porn a little bit. We need to be able to appeal to guys when they're in that stage. We need to give them a place where they identify. There certainly needs to be a place for men to talk about actual grievances, what happened to them in family courts. And, we can't deny that for most guys, they're going to want a pair bond. So analyzing women is not out of the question either. But where the manosphere, I think, is really failing is that there is so little focus on internal work, on actual internal work. It's about external success. It's about external appearance, how you look, how fit you are, how much money you make, but not on who you are and where you want to take your life. And this is where I'm going to take an opportunity to mention I'm in the middle of a project. We've just released the first part of it with Peter Wright on the manomyth, and there is a link to that in the description. I can't recommend it enough. I think it's some of the best work we've ever done together, and I think it really gets to the heart of a lot of this, of what the men's journey actually is, what the red pill journey can be in terms of identity, self-actualization, happiness, being content and comfortable in your own skin, being able to focus on your interest and your needs as you operate in the world without being controlled by other people's perceptions and shame. We lay out the template for this based on Joseph Campbell's work. I think it's great stuff. But what I'll point out is, I've got videos on YouTube that are pushing 1 million views. This first one so far has about 2,500 views. This is why I say the 5% of the 5%. We're talking about a very small group of guys that can move past the rage, move past the resentment, the grievance, the focus on women, all of that stuff, and actually ask themselves, what kind of man do they desire to be? Because most of us are just simply trying to fulfill what society desires men to be. And we don't even stop to think about it. So anyway, that's my 2 bits on that, Shah.
Well, kind of just makes me think probably about like the last 4 or 5 years of the content in the space. And a lot of that I think was revolving around panel shows and sort of these, I guess you could say, rage bait style videos. And I myself used to follow a lot of that. For someone that's been watching all this stuff, or at least 'cause before you were watching it, there was a lot of reading about it before it really even became a YouTube thing. And there was these kind of understandings of these phases you go through, which the rage phase was one of them. And I had kind of seen at least the video content or the popularity of these panel shows more so as a kind of collective rage phase that the entire space was going through. And I hit a point where I was just kind of exhausted with it. I got sick of seeing it on my algorithm. I kept hitting not interested, unsubscribe, don't recommend channel. I'm good off this. I don't want to see myself that way, or I don't want to live like that basically, or be riled up by that. So me personally, I saw that a lot of content was focused on that, and it seemed to be geared, especially from the algorithm, to keep you there. I don't want to say it was all negative. I think there were some positives. At least it puts it out there for people to see. There is some education piece about that, but I think there is a need for providing men a way off of that kind of train, at least. Otherwise, I think once people consume enough of that, there's kind of just a black pill waiting for you. Then you kind of go from a rage phase to a permanent, I don't want to say permanent, but a depression phase, or a black pill phase, basically. And I think that's bad. I never like seeing that. I was never, I don't care for the black pill. I just think that's a bad place for men to be. So I do what I can to help guys out of that as much as I can. So I think where the space needs some help or something else added to it is to prevent men from going there. You kind of even see that with some content creators. They end up just becoming black pilled themselves. And it's just, it's disappointing to me, I'll say.
Well, yeah, and look, I get it. There's always constant temptation to throw in the towel. When you look at how most men behave and how most modern women behave, and everything that's going on in the world, it's easy to doom scroll and to get into these discussions. That's one of the things I said I would never do in this, and I'm never going to do it. We're never going to have a Repairing the Manosphere podcast where we bring in a bunch of OnlyFans models and debate with them whether or not they're whores. I quit watching that stuff a long time ago. And here tonight, even as you saw in the video, we get a reminder that if you do that, you better lock up everything in your house.
Yeah, have a lockbox for the purses if you invite.
Absolutely. Put them all in handcuffs. Cut that sound clip and play it on the feminist sites. Okay, moving on. Shah, do you think that the Manosphere has helped men build better lives, or mostly help them become better competitors in the same gynocentric marketplace?
I honestly want to say yes to both of those at the same time, but I know that the question doesn't allow me to do that, because there is a lot of self, improvement stuff there. There is a lot of content that's focused on people who've gone through really rough divorces, and they've helped men at least see that this can happen to you and you can pick yourself up back from that, or at least build something in your life that is probably something that you hadn't imagined you'd be in even 5-10 years outside of a horrible divorce or a horrible breakup or whatever that is. So in that sense, I would say yes. I think it has, to some extent, basically. Where I tend to kind of get skeptical is if they sell their program as a kind of cure-all, or that it works for short-term and long-term relationships. That brings us back to the debate. There was one point there where I think Sartain gave me a concession, and he basically said, "Oh, okay, I thought when you said long-term relationships, you were just talking about, like, having a girlfriend for 3 or 4 years, not being leveraged in with children or property or these kinds of things." So I think it can kind of misdirect men a bit to believe this is all you got to do, and then you can almost become overconfident in some of this other stuff. So in some ways, yes, I do think it has helped men build better lives, because it's better than a lot of the blue pilled options out there. In some ways, I do believe there are some negatives, though. I think guys have gone overboard with it, and they get a little too drunk off the sauce a bit. And that's where we get into the second part of the question, which is where it's mostly help them become better competitors in the same gynocentric marketplace. I think that's definitely true. And what they will say is, well, that's just the fact of the matter. Like, everybody's just bad out here. The situation's hopeless. This is where it kind of gets into the black pill stuff a little bit. So if you want to deal with this, you have to accept this, and you have to, compete and become the high value guy, or, there's the three genders by Michael Sartain. You got to become this gender instead of the everybody else man. That kind of stuff, I think, is a bit negative for men. And I think what they'll do is just say, well, men respond to that. They need the kind of tough love. Where I personally don't believe that. I think sometimes tough love is the medicine that the doctor ordered. Other time, I think men need a helping hand or someone to listen to them, and these other ways of doing things. It's kind of like that proverb of, if your only tool is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
No doubt. I've got to agree with you on this one. I think I give the Manosphere credit, and I give the data credit, because once I do believe, all in all, that once men look at the blue pill cleanly, clearly, and with a real comprehension of what the blue pill is, they're liberated by that alone. That makes them happier and better adjusted in the long run, even though it comes with the red pill rage and isolation and the grief process that comes with it. I've talked to thousands of guys about this. I've never talked to one that wanted to go backwards. Never one. And I mean, I'm literally talking about thousands of men over the years. I know that, like I said, I read Myth of Male Power in 93. It was probably 97, 98 before I would have really called myself red pill. It took that long really to go through some process. But my life is markedly better from that point on that alone. If I did nothing else, it would have been better than what it was. So I got to give them credit for that. But I do think in the end that once you start going in the direction of gynocentrism again, when you've seen the data, you've seen through the blue pill, you claim you've taken the red pill, which by logic alone would take you out of a gynocentric mindset, and you apply it to appealing to women, chasing them, trying to get their approval, that sort of thing, especially for short-term sexually, then you're just doing what you were doing under the blue pill. You're just better informed and probably better adjusted. I would argue happier doing that than you would be being a blue pill simp. But it's a half step up. I think there's more that can be gleaned from this than just repeating your participation in the gynocentric market. Okay, how much of the modern manosphere is still organized around female approval, even while claiming to reject blue pill thinking?
I feel almost like it's kind of crazy to say this, but I would say probably most of it. I even want to say like 90%.
I could hear John from It's Complicated screaming 100%.
Yeah, I can totally hear him saying that. I mean, because I do recognize there are a lot of good creators, but when I think about a lot of the ones that really, I guess, fly up into popularity, it still tends to be around this kind of stuff, basically. And I do think it is organized around female approval. This is what you got to do to get the women. The ones I have respect for are the ones that can admit that, yeah, this is only ever going to work short term. Like, those ones I don't think are delusional. I think at least they're honest about what it is. I think the error that some of them make is selling this also as that'll fix long term for you.
Right.
So I would say most of the stuff that you see out there, and I mean, that's where personally I've preferred to stop watching a lot of the kind of common stuff. I feel like it's been a rerun for a while. And like you said, I know there's probably new blood that comes in, and they go through it, and they're probably looking for that kind of stuff. But this is where I actually really appreciate. I know you brought up the mano myth discussion earlier, and there's still more to come on that. But it's done a good job of looking at this journey that a man takes through this manosphere space, and it really charts out a lot of things that I think make sense as far as the archetypal journey for it, but it doesn't just stop at a certain place like a lot of these places I think tend to do. At least a lot of the content in the space tends to do.
I got to agree with you entirely on this. I think this is where I reluctantly, but if I'm going to be truthful, I have to give the Manosphere kind of a big fat zero on this one. The whole notion of saying I took a red pill and then turning around and going right back into a blue pill script, calling it something else, to me is just it just doesn't make sense. And we see this practiced openly in the Manosphere all the time. Oh yeah, I took the red pill. I'm totally down for being red pill. Gotta go. Gotta hit the gym. Those ladies aren't going to be hitting on me if I don't hit the gym. So gotta go and gotta go make more money because that's how you get women. I got to become a high value man.
It's like a cosplay. It's cosplaying this alpha high value sort of. It's very cartoonish to me. There's a kind of caricature there, and I think people really fall into that. Now, listen, I can see like if that helps you out to improve where you are before. I think there are people that are so in such a situation that they need to be pulled out of, and that's good. But at a certain point, I just think more is needed, and it can get pretty simplistic, basically.
Yeah, I'm totally red pill, dude. By the way, do you know if they do like jawline implants so I can have a little more chiseled look to my face? And,
exactly. Let me use AI to change the way I look and completely lie about my appearance and my shoulders or something. I don't know.
Yes, let me use AI to absolutely create a false image of who I am. And then later on my next show, I'll be bitching about women who show old photos on dating profiles that don't accurately reflect who they are.
Yeah. It's it kind of reminds me of something else. These are some just ideas that I've toyed with or sometimes think about, shower thoughts or walking around. But I had kind of seen some of this red pill advice almost as like the sort of answer being to kind of mirror the same narcissism back that the women were doing essentially. And to me, there's a lot of parallels on either side. And I'll say it will work, for the short term or whatever. But ultimately, it is unfortunate because I think it's just this downward spiral of flushing down the toilet into a more sort of selfish kind of narcissistic culture as, both sides go at each other like this.
Yes, the more 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, unfortunately. How about the next question, Shah?
Okay, let's see. Has the Manosphere done enough to address marriage, family formation, fatherhood, divorce risk, and institutional bias against men?
No. I would have to say, I think probably the best shot that we've had of the Manosphere addressing any of that has been from the tradcons, and they're totally blue pill. They're totally anti-discernment. They're very much pro just, wife up the hoe. I mean, she walked into a church one day, so she must be suitable to marry, right? That's basically the mentality. I actually look at the tradcon element of the Manosphere, and I do include them as damaging to the family, damaging to marriage, damaging to children. When you won't look ahead at the possibility of divorce and take care of yourself by either avoiding legal marriage together or being in a place where you can get a really good prenup, and having the mentality that you're going to expect women to show up with some material value, with something to bring to the family situation that's of actual value. And instead, they just preach basic blue pill. If she's pretty, if you like her, then you need to please her. And of course, this frequently ends in divorce. It ends in destroyed lives for children, and it ends up in financial ruin for men. It ends up in false accusations and all the other problems that we've been talking about in the Manosphere for about the past 20 years now comes out of this stupid sort of I don't care approach. The only thing that matters here is to get married and to start a family. That is a suicidal plan. And Andrew Wilson et al. Are just guilty as sin at pushing this forward.
Well, it's interesting. I'm grateful that you bring up tradcons. The first image I had in my mind, because they've been notoriously bad at this, and it's unfortunate because you would think that the traditional conservative side would be the side that would have more of a chance of being able to address this stuff genuinely and authentically. But I have a image flash through my mind, and was from a few years back, and I think it was like fall of 2023. But Daily Wire was kind of having it out with the Red Pillar folks. And they were basically dunking on the Red Pillars, you can say. And you had like Candace Owens, Michael Knowles, you had all the Daily Wire guys smoking cigars there in a circle. Ben Shapiro and Boring, Jeremy Boring, I think was the CEO. But he had said, like, they had just tangentially acknowledged that there was an issue with family law in this discussion they were having. And Jeremy Boring was just like, "Oh yeah, you know what? Let's invest some money. We should fund a think tank on this stuff." It's now 2026, and that was just all hot air, and they never did anything like that because they really don't care. And myself, this is what inspired me because I was so focused on child support and family law, and I was just like, God, how did we get the laws that we got? And that's why I ran into the dowry conversation and the gold pill conversation. I was originally very focused on tradcons. That was the thing that was annoying me. They would say, "Oh, men and women have been doing this for thousands of years." That was Matt Walsh, and I was like, "Thousands of years? Hold on now. Now you're in my neck of the woods."
Yep.
And so I had almost fashioned this entire argument and all this study of the dowry because my plan was to direct it at them. They were the ones that were really annoying me. Somehow it trailed over into the red pill. I mean, as far as these other folks went, but they came looking for us. We didn't come looking for them as far as the debate goes. But yeah, unfortunately, they have done nothing to address that. It's the vices typically fall on the sword, and it's all rooted in the romantic ethic. And they ground it with like, you have to save Western civilization, which I just see as a romantic ethic sort of on a macro level. You have this romantic notion of this thing and you have to save it and be a hero, kind of the same way they want you to do with the woman, wife up this woman after she's done all these things and she's 30 years old now. I mean, they do this, they parade that on their shows. Yep. And other aspects I'd say of the manosphere, except for a very small contingent, have been focused on this. But I think it's a very important thing. I think a lot of people want to say, well, they haven't been effective, but I don't believe that. There are small wins here, even the presumption for 50-50 custody in Kentucky. I mean, there are men's rights guys on the ground that are pushing for that kind of thing, right. So even though there still needs to be this cultural change and a greater consciousness and understanding about it, I still think it's very important work. And that's why I spend a lot of time on my channel having these discussions, even if it doesn't have a kind of mass market appeal, because we're not selling sex,
Right. And we're not trying to fit into the mainstream. So that's just as well.
If I had to give the more modern manosphere, the more popular side some credit, I do think they do a good job of discussing divorce risk and even institutional bias against men. They have put that out there. As far as addressing marriage and family formation, not so much. And I think that was a bit of a salient point in our debate with Rollo and Sartain, because I was trying to establish that, hey, I want you guys to acknowledge that what you're teaching and selling, it falls short right here. And if they acknowledge that, that's good. If they don't acknowledge that, that's where it's kind of an issue for me, because now I feel like you're leading men to a bad place by getting them to believe something that's not true.
That seems to be what they're doing. I see two sides to this, to the sort of tradcon resistance to reality where it concerns family law, child support, and these things, the nature of marriage today. One, I'm reminded of Tucker Carlson, I think is a grand idiot when it comes to this stuff. talking to Helen Smith many years ago on Fox News, literally telling her, she was pointing out that men are doing risk assessment now, and they're looking at marriage and deciding this isn't worth it, and they're walking away. And he literally told her, but it's their job to do it anyway. They're supposed to take a bad deal. And he literally said, that's what being a man means.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
Is that you have to take, and the look she gave him was priceless. I did a freeze frame on it. She looked at him like, what planet, are you from? But the other side of that, which I think is more commonly the problem, is the romantic ethic. And with the romantic ethic comes the edict, happy wife, happy life. And I don't think Andrew and his ilk are going to talk about this stuff because they're afraid of upsetting the women in their audience. They're afraid of upsetting their wives. It is a discussion that doesn't serve their ideological objective, is to get as many men to marry as possible. But I really think the true resistance is the resistance to telling the truth to women. They just don't want to spine up and do it.
I think the most difficult part for them is that encountering this and truly assimilating it or processing it, especially when it comes to even the gold pill discussion, maybe some of it would appeal to them. But I think there is an issue in identity kind of crisis that occurs if they're going to acknowledge this more, wrapped up in whatever the beliefs around marriage is for them, as well as what it means to be a man and what masculinity is. And in some ways, I always felt like the modern manosphere space, and I don't mean the tradcons, but I mean the one we're familiar with and involved with. I always felt like they kind of bent the knee to the tradcons when it came to this discussion. Almost like the tradcons come in and accusing you of saying, "Oh, well, you don't want to be men, or you're basically just you're like a male version of a feminist or something like that." And instead of holding fast and, saying, screw you, we don't actually care what you think we are. It was more, I sort of felt like they were like, no, we agree with you on a lot of these things. And this is just the part we're upset about. I had kind of seen it that way. Maybe part of it was necessary for the election back then. I can understand that part. But I do think as the manosphere grows and becomes more sophisticated, they have to push back a lot harder on this tradcon side of things. Otherwise, tradcons, I think, do a pretty good job of getting a lot of the bigger manosphere creators in line, so to speak.
Yep. I'll put it out there again. Andrew Wilson is welcome to come on this podcast anytime. I would love to have a discussion. I think he's a really intelligent guy. I did a discussion with him once and Aaron Clary with Pearl.
I remember that one.
He's a bright, insightful guy. He's very articulate, and he's a very skilled debater. But I'm saying publicly, I don't believe he can pull that argument off here. I don't think, because I won't let him avoid it. And I don't think he has the logic or the rationale to back up this blind pro-marriage, don't practice discernment, don't choose the right woman. If she's wearing a crucifix, has showed up in a Catholic church or whatever kind of church, then you've got to assume that she's marriageable material that they push. I don't think he can do it, and I wish he would come on here because I think it's a badly needed discussion that so far the tradcons, I saw a post by Brad Wilcox today playing on men's loneliness. Men are lonely, and of course marriage is the solution, right? Because married men never feel lonely.
This is where I like the gold pill discussion also, especially for them, because I would love to ask them, especially when you think of these bigger tradcons, like why are you sending your daughter out penniless with nothing but the clothes on her back and expecting some guy that's not related to your family to save the day? And then you wonder why they end up on, these OnlyFans sites or whatever. It just doesn't make sense. So there's this weird thing there. And, I have all the historical data to show them this, especially when it comes to this idea of being traditional. So that would be a fun conversation. I mean, but like you say, I think it is a sorely needed one. I think it's important. and that it needs to be had.
Yeah, and these same guys, by the way, are ones that are sending their daughters out to the Seven Sisters schools in order to get advanced degrees and be boss girls, just like they're sending their sons. And then they come online and pine about the days when women were women and men were men.
Yeah.
It doesn't fit. There's a lot of hypocrisy in that. Okay. What would a truly useful manosphere look like if it were centered on male self-respect, autonomy, accountability, and non-gynocentric living? And before you answer that, I've got to resist the temptation to hold up my book and say, this is the manosphere.
You know what? Just go for it.
I don't have a copy handy right
Okay.
now. I should have prepared for this moment, but I didn't. But once again, what would a truly useful manosphere look like if it were centered on male self-respect, autonomy, accountability, and non-gynocentric living?
I think that's a challenging question. You know, just off top, I think it would look very different from kind of the tradconisms that we see seeping into the space. And I think there would be a kind of completely different conception of masculinity than you see pervading around there. And it might even be less boisterous, more grounded in that way. You know, where you kind of see a lot of these creators and there is sort of like a on display 13-year-old boy inside of them to some degree. But I do think there would be different conversations. You know, obviously it would be less female focused. There'd be less shaming around that. I think in some ways, you know, some of the bigger voices or just bigger narratives in the space will shame men for wanting to take a certain path, you know, especially if it's, let's say if it's MGTOW or something like that. And just enjoying your life instead of being on this kind of self-improvement hamster wheel all the time and constantly selling that. The thing is, though, it's just that kind of talk just dovetails so nicely into selling certain types of courses and these kinds of books. And, you know, again, self-improvement's good. I think if that's what you want, then that's there for you. There's plenty of people. But when it's oversold a little bit, especially when it gets into these things like family formation and marriage and this kind of stuff is where I tend to get skeptical, just as a person who worked for so long in family law and just seen people kind of fall flat on their faces with that.
Yeah, if your shtick is self-improvement, but you don't feel good about yourself without a woman's approval, I would suggest altering course on what you think self-improvement actually is to begin with.
Can I add a little bit more?
Yeah, please do.
Well, it kind of reminds me, I think John from It's Complicated discusses this, or he might have had an episode on it. But he has a question that's, how did the men's movement, or he showed a picture, it's like black and white. And I think it's actually a protest with Warren Farrell, where it's more about liberating men, basically. And his question is, how did the men's movement go from men's liberation to all about male self-improvement, basically? And it's something that I've wrestled with and thought about myself, because to me, it's kind of a challenging question. But I think a truly non-gynocentric centered manosphere, when you would have accusations thrown at you like, oh, well, you're just feminism for men or something like that, whether if it is or isn't, it's just about not caring what they say and just marching forward regardless anyway. So I do think some of the kind of whips or I forgot what cattle prods that some of these bigger, you know, like tradcon spaces have still kind of work on the gynocentric manosphere in some ways.
I got to agree with that. The first thought that came to my mind with this question was that the manosphere would be a lot smaller. There would be a lot of guys, and you can imagine some of the names I would name if I were naming them, but I'm not going to. But a lot of guys would have to go off and form something else not called the manosphere. If the manosphere became solely about self-respect and truly improving your life, self-actualization, accountability, living a good life, if it were focused on those things, the Manosphere would lose a lot of audience because, again, I think that this is where we're talking about the 5% of the 5% area. These are the guys that actually get a sensible direction to go with it, and I just don't think the Manosphere is doing that well at that part of it. And again, it's why I started this podcast. I don't imagine for a moment that I'm going to change the world in this way, but I mean, it can change for some men if they're exposed to the right conversations, and that's what we're trying to do here, is to have that conversation. This is about more than attracting and pleasing women. It's about more than financial success. It's more than being ripped. It's more than being the hottest looking guy you can be. I mean, all those things are really nice, but I know plenty of people that have money that are outright miserable, and there's more to life than this stuff. And I wish the Manosphere did a better job of that. We're going to move on to another question here. I'm going to read this one. These final two questions, Shah and I are going to be grading the Manosphere. We're going to give it report card grades, A, B, C, D, or F, or B plus, C minus, any of those that we're typically used to. First on particular subjects, then the Manosphere as a whole. So, Shah, if you were issuing a final report card, what grades would you give the Manosphere in these categories? The first category is truth-telling.
Okay. Do you want to each give our grade on it as we go through the categories?
Yeah.
Okay. So truth-telling. I'd give it a B plus. And I say that because I do think there are elements of the Manosphere that are not afraid to say certain things, and sometimes those things really need to be said, which is good. But I do think there can be an element or air of overconfidence to where it starts to trail into something that's more cartoonish and maybe not helpful as they go, deeper into it. So then it starts to be like a little bit more opinion, but they might call it truth. So I would give it a B plus there.
I was tempted to go with A minus, but as you were talking, I thought of a couple of things that I hadn't considered in the lead up to this. I'm going with the B plus too. I think there's a lot of good information out there. And again, I hold it up any time. For great information, read The Rational Male. I mean, you'll get great information in there. There's no doubt about it at all. But there's a caveat with that there is stuff you get from the Manosphere that is not true. Like that hypergamy is a biologically determined behavior unilaterally performed in women, and that's the way the human species is. It's total bull. It's total bull. The historical record disproves this absolutely without any question whatsoever. As a matter of fact, it disproves it so thoroughly, it makes you wonder how on earth anybody could come up with such a dumb idea. Honestly. So there is some garbage that has floated to the top in the Manosphere in terms of understanding the nature of human behavior. The animal studies that they do, that a lot of the biodeterminists, the evocyte guys, take animal studies, and they don't consider for one moment there is, between the complexities of chimpanzee culture and human culture, the differences that influence behavior are absolutely staggering. The cultural influences on human, the religious influence, legal influence, all these things that play into the human experience. And then they want to reduce it down to bonobos.
Technological. Yeah, there's
technological, so everything, politics, all this stuff plays in.
Economics.
It's vastly more complicated than animals that have the mentality at best of a human 2-year-old. Making this comparison is a desperate stretch. in order to prove a theory. And it flies in the face of all the evidence we have. There's nothing to support it. So they move from an A- to a B+. But I say that also with the understanding that the information is fundamentally sound in a lot of ways. Even if you don't agree with how they arrived at the conclusions, there's a lot of good conclusions, and it is better than the absolute F- that we would have to assign to the blue pill, which is all lies, all about bull, all about romantic ethic and mindlessness where it comes to women. So I'm going with the B+ on that. The next category, the next subject we're going to grade is male accountability. So what say you to that?
You know, I would even put that at a, to be honest. If I had to critique that, I think there's a hyper focus on that. And there's even a degree of like the other side can completely not be accountable or even not held accountable at all, just give up on it. And I can understand how that, I can understand why people say that or how that became a thing to be. But then I think it also kind of lends itself to this romantic ethic. I think it makes it hard to then have expectations of the other side if you're going to believe that. So when it comes to male accountability, I do think the space does a great job on that. Such a great job that it might even go, overboard and, you suffocate from it in some ways. Maybe that's too extreme. But I would say so. I mean, there might be some aspects of male accountability where they fail to do that, maybe from a different perspective. But I think by and large, a lot of the space doesn't want to have a victim mentality. There are aspects of the space that might, but that's when I think you get into black pillar type stuff. And then it's just like, oh, wow, everything's just so terrible. It's doom and gloom. That part I think does a bad job, but I think the part that's more like the coaching and stuff like that, they're usually right on it.
We're going to have a difference in this one. I'm long about the lines of C+.
Okay.
for this, maybe B-. I don't know. The reason I'm saying that is that, again, I talk to a lot of guys in the manosphere, and I'm always on social media looking at these guys' responses to situations, how they feel about different topics. And one of the things I see coming up over and over again from men in the manosphere was that she turned out to be a borderline and I had no way of knowing.
Yes.
She turned into a demon after we got married and I had no way of knowing. There was absolutely no way. And I'm like, that's baloney. You had every opportunity to know. One, you didn't check, you didn't test, you didn't practice discernment. And two, you ignored 10,000 red flags that were in your face for a long period of time before you married her. And after you're married, she had you locked in so it could come out full force. But I don't buy that. I still think the manosphere has done a pretty poor job of teaching men discernment. It's one of the reasons I like a good bit of Rich Cooper's work, because he at least talks about this stuff in very blunt, direct terms. And I don't see it in a lot of other places. I know there's other people that do it. I wish I saw more of it, though. So I'm going to go with the C+ on that. But
I could certainly see what you're saying. I mean, I have seen some of that stuff out there as well. And I think for me personally, I've kind of wanted to get into the space to kind of point out at least some of the stuff as pertains like family law or child support, or where some of the risks of this high value man conversation is, and that doesn't make you immune to any of this stuff, or a lot of this stuff, especially. So I could see where you're coming with that.
Yeah, but again, I can see where you're coming from it too, because there is that. But by the way, that's why for all these years I've been like a broken record saying there's no victims, only volunteers. We really do need more of that mentality, because victim mentality does not serve men in any way.
When I think of like A+ people in the space, like you said, Rich Cooper, I know he does a lot of that. For me, Coach Greg Adams, I think is right on the money.
Yeah, he is.
So yeah, that's what I was thinking of, when I said that. But yeah, I totally I can get what you're saying. So makes sense to me.
Still a little bit too much woe is me out there. I love what Tony Robbins said, man, life's not boring, you are.
Yeah.
And he's an accountability freak, which I like. Anyway, next subject we're going to be evaluating is relationship advice.
I would give that, I'd say, a C minus at best. And okay, I'm kind of including marriage in this. But maybe even regular relationships too. Again, I think a lot of it still follows this kind of male utility script. So there's a bit of a lack of requiring something from the other side. So when it comes to relationship advice, I think at best it's just what I would call a low leveraged long-term relationship, which to me is still fundamentally short-term, because you're not the relationship advice I think they're giving you advice for is really nothing that would help you want to buy property with somebody or want to have children with somebody for the long term. So I just think that's missing, basically. As far as these kinds of I guess PUA tactics in terms of maybe keeping someone wrapped around your finger with the kind of reverse romantic ethic, I think that they know how to do that well. I got to give them credit for that.
Yep.
But this is where I think in some ways that the trad cons have the most ammo when they come after people in the red pill space, because I think they see this part and this is where they want to critique the most. And I think it can use help, basically.
The only thing you said that I even remotely disagree with, and I'm going with your C minus as well. I think there's a lot lacking there, is that yes, the PUAs, that ethic is great about advising men, like here's how you keep her off balance, the push-pull stuff, and do that. But is that good relationship advice? Is this really how to conduct a relationship if you're thinking about pair bonding and sharing life with another human being in an atmosphere of trust?
Well, I'd say no. Yeah, exactly. And that's why I have to stop it at short term. Like, you can't do anything high leverage with that because the bond there is not being cultivated for anything good.
Yes, it doesn't have a foundation of trust from the beginning. It's about manipulation.
I'll tell you what, we might have to move that to a D plus from a C minus.
Okay, I'll go with you on that. D plus it is. Okay, let's see. Next topic, marriage family analysis.
Okay, so F, basically. Well, okay, aside from how bad of a deal it is, I would say, all right, D minus, because they get that and they really rub that, they put that front and center, and I do love that. When it comes to, again, the history of marriage, all of that pertinent, relevant stuff that we've been chatting about for the past, year and a half, almost 2 years, I think has been completely missing. There are some creators, again, I'll have to refer to Coach Greg Adams, because he has done such a good job of dissecting the husband-wife dynamic, the family dynamics, that it really is. There are creators in the space that do a good job. But I'd say overall, with especially some of the larger things, I just think there's a lot missing there. And this kind of dovetails off the last category, relationship advice, because there isn't much there about how do we even begin to look at the long term in a way that could make sense, or at least what a fair, balanced deal looks like to begin with.
Fair enough. For me, I've got to give 3 grades on this because I'm talking about different groups. The tradcons, absolute F, not just an F, a 0. And you're barred from taking the course again.
You're expelled.
You're expelled forever for the rest of your lives. You get an absolute nothing from the tradcons. I'll give the MRA types a C, maybe a C plus on some of the analysis, but a lot of those guys still revert to the productor-provider script, the elevated woman, that sort of thing. I give the MGTOW A+ for their marriage family analysis. They're the only A+ anybody's getting from me in this discussion is the MGTOWs when it comes to marriage and family. They have looked and seen past the matrix into reality, and they're actually acting rationally and according to the information that they have. It's not a life that I would choose for myself. Obviously, I didn't. But you can't argue with the guys. They're looking at cold stone truth in the face, and they're saying, I'm not playing this game, because they actually know what the game is.
I will say, of all the groups you mentioned, the MGTOWs have always been in the space, the ones I have the most respect for.
Me too.
We even have kind of a funny thing on my channel in my streams where it's always like, all roads lead to MGTOW. Sort of, we say that enough because we see so many things, and it's just like, yeah, we understand the MGTOW guys. They're the only ones that make sense here in a lot of ways.
And MGTOW, that is all. I get that in my comments too. All roads lead to MGTOW. Yes. And if the only way to win is not to play.
I hear some of the most salient points for them. If it's a little black pilled, I don't like that, but a lot of the other stuff, like you say, the analysis, very good, very good.
Okay. 2 more subjects to grade. How's the Manosphere doing with mental health?
I'd probably give it a C-. I mean, maybe I could be even more generous and give it a C, because it's leagues beyond the alternative, I think, especially as pertains men's mental health. So I do want to acknowledge the work that a lot of creators have done to give men a space. I know a lot of these creators have even spoken with men one-on-one. For me, it's not something I sell, but men have just reached out to me and asked to talk. And I understand how needed it is and how many people have done that. So I want to give high marks to them, definitely. But the part where it kind of trails off is when there's this hyper focus on the self-improvement, when you got, like some of these Andrew Tate types who will, be like, you're not a man unless you buy women the most expensive things in the world. I think that kind of stuff and that kind of focus can actually be harmful to men's mental health in a way, because you're attacking their identity. You're not giving them anything solid to build themselves upon. It kind of goes back to the metaphor of only having a hammer and thinking everything is a nail. And a lot of that stuff I kind of see in a way to sort of break down men. I mean, it's almost like if you look at the way Andrew Tate speaks about like pimping or something, what he does to the women, in some ways, there's a reflection of that on the men. Let me break down your self-esteem. I'm the only one with the answer. Now join my course or whatever and get on this, self-improvement train. A hyper self-improvement train. So that part I don't like, but I just have to acknowledge that there's so many people in the space that do provide help to men when it comes to this part, the mental health aspect.
Yeah, matter of fact, next week I'm going to have Dr. Hannah Spire on this. We're going to do an early podcast. She's in the UK. She's an MD that is putting out some great content on these subjects. So we're going to be talking about that a lot. On the mental health myself, I'll go with your grade, or I may give them a solid C, somewhere around there. But I really take your point to heart. If you're motivated toward a course of action in life because somebody shamed your masculinity, you might want to reconsider whether or not you've actually taken a red pill.
Exactly.
If Andrew Tate is your source of inspiration, look, I'm not here to, at least not too harshly, judge anybody, but I think that is better suited for 14-year-olds than it is for actually grown men. Just doesn't work for me. I don't think we're doing near enough good a job. And God knows, you look at the suicide ratio, you look at the men's actual lived experience, what they're living with, the rates of alcoholism, substance abuse, everything else that really, really affects the lives of men. we could be doing better, and I think the Manosphere could actually do a lot better. The final topic is, what grade do you want to give them on genuine red pill liberation? I know John from It's Complicated is going to love that question.
Well, I think I'm going to borrow a strategy that you did and have to give separate grades for this, and maybe it can lead to a cumulative. But I'd have to give the MGTOW guys an A+ on that, because I think they get it and they understand it when it comes to actual abandoning the gynocentrism, basically, and then abandoning the romantic ethic, in order to replace it for something that is, more of a self-actualization and building, some solid, genuine character. Then there's, the other spaces, of course, the tradcons. I mean, you can't even include them. They may as well be blue-pilled.
Right.
So that word genuine is the qualifier of this.
Yep.
that makes me want to give a lower grade to the rest of the space, which unfortunately I got to give them a D- there. I want to give them an F, but maybe they can pass on a little bit to the next grade and not be completely held back. Again, better than what the blue pill offers.
No, I think we got to expel the tradcons. We need to get them out of the Manosphere, man. They are bad mojo.
They are. I would love to see a Manosphere that stands up to them unequivocally every time.
Yep. And I will join you in giving the tradcons an F. I know there's no such thing as an F-, but I would still give it to them. The MRA types, I'd probably, in terms of genuine liberation, C+, B-. That, I mean, it's so much of that varies by individual. It's hard to judge the MRAs collectively, because some MRAs are totally blue pill and others are very red pill. So I give them a middle of the road grade on that. And on MGTOW, I'm back to the A+. In terms of genuine liberation, and when I talk about them being liberated or being MGTOW, I don't just necessarily mean guys that have sworn off women altogether and don't date and don't have anything to do with them. I'm talking about the guys that get up every day and are totally prepared to go alone, rather than face BS from a woman or drama or manipulation or the sexual manipulation and all the stuff that comes with relationships with most women. These are guys that'll show them the door before they'll put up with it. And I don't know how you get more liberated than that. That was always, to me, from the very beginning, it was like, that's what the red pill meant to me, was that you became free of all this stuff. And if women didn't like it, too bad.
Yeah, and then, I'm not sure if we highlighted the other group here, but the kind of PUA hyper self-improvement types, I got to give them those are the D- folks for me.
Yep.
Because again, it's more about catering to women's delusional standards than it is about genuine red pill liberation.
And God knows those standards are delusional. I mean, Aaron Curry broke this stuff down. A lot of people have, of, who would actually qualify for the average woman on Tinder that's, maybe 5'2", 160, 170 pounds. She wants Chad too.
Yeah.
And she'll spend the rest of her life looking for him. Okay, the final question here is, when you look at the modern manosphere as a whole, what grade would you give it for actually helping men improve their lives?
Well, I'm kind of tempted to take a kind of cumulative of the past grades I gave the other one. I'm tempted to put it higher, but I think I'd have to stick around a B-. Only because, there's good elements I have to acknowledge, but then there's also some that I think are not good. So I would settle it around a B-. I definitely think there's things that can be done better. And I think we've kind of highlighted a lot of these points here, but that's what I settle on, a B-.
I'll go with the B minus, or maybe even a solid B. I do think, again, we have to always express the caveat that we're talking about a very diverse group of men. I mean, if you look at the average MGTOW and the average TradCon, they are total polar opposites from each other, yet they're still considered Manosphere. So I think we have to take that into account. What I think, the reason I go more toward the higher end of the scale is because I think MGTOW, which includes at this point millions of men who never even heard the term MGTOW. There's most men, the majority, are walking away from dating. They're walking away from this ethic, and even if they don't know why, and even if they've never heard of MGTOW, those guys are benefiting from, I think, the ripple effect from Manosphere content going on the past 10 or 15 years. They're starting to at least awake to the truth enough to walk away and to start taking care of their own lives. I mean, that doesn't mean their lives are taken care of. I think we got a lot of dysfunction in that community too, but that's not the topic of tonight. But on sheer numbers alone, I'm going to gravitate toward the higher end and give them a B to B minus. And overall, that's how I think the Manosphere is done. And that sums up our questions. Brian, do we have any comments?
Yes, we do. Paul, hold on just a second. I got some super chats. I should probably read those. And then I got a couple of comments.
Okay.
I think I got one, but it's okay. Okay, Fernando Valdez sent $500 Mexican and says, love seeing you, keep at it, and continue doing great work with the series, my friend. I think you and Rollo are playing two completely different games. You're focused on helping men, while he seems more focused on marketing and grabbing attention. Just reading his super chat because he sends it in. Not trying to create any drama.
Listen, I know this guy. Great guy. And Fernando is what you call a man's man. Absolutely. Thank you so much for the donation, Fernando. We miss you around the groups. Don't be a stranger.
Right. It's Complicated channel, John, gives $4.99 and says, when it comes to the red pill / Manosphere, is chasing status really escaping the Matrix, or is chasing status the Matrix itself?
That's a good question. the new escaping the Matrix is escaping the adaptation hamster wheel, or the status chasing. That's interesting. I don't know, what do you think, Paul? It's a tough one.
I think John already knows my answer to this question. It's absolutely, it's re-engaging the Matrix. I mean, why do men chase status? What's the reason? They chase status to attract women and to have power, but mainly to attract women. So it's a self-answering question in my book. If you're chasing the whole high status thing, you're in the Matrix and you're swallowing blue pills every day. And you may be one of those guys that's calling them red pill, but I'm sure that makes you feel better about what you're doing, but it's not really red pill. I want to know, John, put in the comments if you approve of my answer. I need to know now.
Thank you, John.
All right. Robert Estelle, I hope I'm not butchering that, sorry, gives $10 and says, salute Paul and Shah.
Salute, sir.
Salute.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All right. At Dennis Green 6222 gives us $10 Australian and says, in final year psych mental health diagnosis, the effort to externalize female borderline behaviors to trauma, oppression, and victimhood is obvious. Calling it out threatens my marks. Thoughts?
John, you want to go first?
It just makes me, you were talking about guys who are walking away. And, of course, I'm not saying do that. You do what you got to do to get your degree, challenge them where you can. But this is why, especially when it comes to the institutional bias. And I think, for someone that, even if you're not in school, I think people who work normal jobs and businesses and corporations, they see this kind of stuff everywhere. And you always do got to think twice. about, saying anything, which makes me again appreciate these spaces a lot more. But I understand what he's talking about, and I understand that kind of feeling of just immediate, like, you can just almost you just see that bias, and it's I wish I could give you better advice. I wish I could tell you just, hey man, go right after it and challenge them every single time. But I understand there's a lot riding on the line for you.
My take's going to be a little different than that, and I'm almost embarrassed at my take, to tell you the truth. But I'm going to be honest about it. I've been harping for years on the idea of guys living their values. That if you're not living your values, you're in trouble. But at the same time, if you walk into an office job and start talking about the latest episode of Repairing the Manosphere and Paul Elam, you're going to get fired. At the very least, you're going to get fired. You might get sued. You might get run out of the office that day. I don't think it's a betrayal of your values to protect your interests. And so for that reason, I would suggest very strongly keeping your head down. And the objective is the degree. Get the degree. And right now, university environment is so hostile toward normal men, toward blue pill men. It's absolutely hostile in the uni environment. And I take it especially in places like Australia, where they're super feminist in their universities. I would absolutely keep my head down, get my degree, and be strategic in the future. I mean, you may end up working, even doing sort of like what I do, where you can talk a lot more freely. But eating the red pill doesn't mandate your suicide professionally. And anybody that tells you that it does, I think, is giving you bad advice. I'm with Shah. I would love to say, screw them, man. Get in their face, challenge them. I can tell you for a fact, I worked with borderlines in chemical dependency treatment centers for decades. And I can tell you that for everyone that came in that did have childhood trauma, there was another one that came in and lied about childhood trauma. You can't, with borderlines, you don't know if it's real. They don't even know what's real sometimes. And so this whole thing of I guess God Sod would call it suicidal empathy. I just call it stupidity. This idea that we have to treat every borderline, and let's be honest here. Borderlines, character-wise, characterologically, they're terrible people. They're bad human beings, and they lie, and they lie about having stuff perpetrated on them. Chronically, they live in a total fantasy about themselves as a victim of everybody and everything, when they're really pathologically spoiled brats. And I mean the word pathologically literally. They are sick people and they're miserable, and I feel for them in that regard. But yes, the people in the mental health profession, she's borderline. What did her father do to her? And they go on witch hunts with this stuff. So I can imagine, Dennis, it's hard for you to hold your tongue sometimes. But I would, honestly, protect yourself, bro.
If I can add something,
yeah.
I will say that it doesn't mean that you have to agree with them or even say out loud or let them kind of force you to speak out loud what they want. Sometimes if I encounter stuff like that, I just let my silence speak, or just tell them, you don't want to hear my opinion. And it's important, I think, that you go through this in the sense of, we need more men like you in these kinds of fields, and
yes,
you're gonna get your opportunity to employ what you're learning in order to help change the field. I really believe that. So there will be a time and place, basically.
Agreed.
All right. Next, Robert Estelle again gives $10 and says, I enjoyed your interview with Aaron Clary.
Thank you. And thank you for the gift.
And we got a couple of just regular comments, both of them from John. Those were basically the best ones that I saw. So no offense to anybody who sent in a good question and I didn't see it. It's Complicated said, why is the Manosphere often viewed as advocating for men when much of its message is descriptive rather than prescriptive?
That's an interesting question. I kind of look at that in terms of, like, I don't know if he means the kind of discussion of praxeology that's out there. So it's like, if it's all a praxeology and it's not prescriptive, then how can you advocate for men? I think maybe that's what he means. Not sure, Paul.
Yeah, I don't think the Manosphere, much of it claims, I proudly proclaim that I am an advocate for men. This is what I do. But I don't think most of the Manosphere claims to be an advocate for men. They're advocates for getting laid, advocates for getting rich, advocates for getting buff, advocates for being successful. And not that there's anything wrong with any of those things, but I look at the Manosphere in general the same way I look at tradcons. I don't care about men. They care about clicks. They care about revenue. They care about exposure and attention, which we know another group that's kind of like that too. But I don't think they claim it that much, John. I think they're proudly clickbait, and look, there's a place for that in the world. They're still letting some good juice out there for the world. So I got no problem with that. But I just don't hear a lot of any of the more prominent people in the Manosphere saying anything about advocacy for men at all. PUAs advocate for getting laid. Certainly, you don't see tradcons advocating for change in marriage law. If they cared about men, if they were advocating for men, they would talk every bit as much about family law as they do about the importance of marriage and family. But no, what they care about there is their agenda. It's not about men. I don't think they could give a damn for the most part.
All right, another super chat from Driver Suze for $5. And Driver Suze says, regarding the pursuit of high status, the question to ask is, high compared to what and according to whom?
Driver Suze, thank you, Suze, for the donations. Suze is a totally OG, goes all the way back to the beginnings of AVFM, and appreciate the question and the donation, Suze. Yes, the question is, what is high status? And if you're measuring yourself by how you think women measure you, you have one standard of high. If I'm measuring myself by how do I feel comfortable in my own skin, am I okay with my life, am I okay with my values, with what I'm doing, then it's a totally different standard that totally leaves women out of the picture. So I think it's a really, really thoughtful, important question. What is high? What is high to you? And I think every man needs to ask himself, what is high status? And why is that status? Why do you consider it high? Why is it important to you? Again, when I was 22, high status guys were the guys that got laid. End of story. I'm 69. I have a different view of life now. Status in that way isn't important to me. And I think it falls off with most insightful men who are thoughtful about living better lives. They start getting into this in about their mid-30s, changing their ideas of what's important and what status is. So you'll get different answers from all different age groups and all different perspectives, but I still think it's an incredibly important question. What's high to you? And why?
All right, and I got one more from It's Complicated channel. I think this is the last one I saw that was interesting. If we all share the Manosphere space, MRA, PUA, MGTOW, TradCon, etc., why do we constantly talk about them while they barely acknowledge us?
Oh, gosh, I wish I could get more clarity on who's them and us. Like if he means TradCons or specifically not acknowledging, like the mainstream not acknowledging
I
us?
think, yeah, I'll read it again so you hear it. It says, if we all share the Manosphere space, MRA, PUA, MGTOW, TradCon, etc., why do we constantly talk about them while they barely acknowledge us? So I guess he's talking about the people that we have been, or you guys have been sort of, critiquing.
I think there is I hate to say it, but I think there's an aspect of gatekeeping. And I think, at least for the folks that are bigger in the space, it's like they have to be the ones that, or have to believe or sell that they're the ones that have the message and they're 100% right about it, and everybody else is wrong. And you either got to kiss the ring, or you're just not part of this, and we're not going to acknowledge you, basically. And I think there's a little bit of that in there, which is unfortunate, but that kind of goes down to, wanting control and wanting to sell that you're the one that understands this and has the best idea on this whole thing.
I think also that there's frequently people in the same community faction off and separate from each other, don't talk that much to each other. I think that's actually a pretty common occurrence. But I do think, and I don't think anybody could change my mind about this, I think that TradCons have a hard time acknowledging us because they can't argue with us. I don't think it's, Andrew may or may not ever come on this podcast and have a discussion with me about family law and about the wisdom of modern marriage and legal marriage, that sort of thing. But it's not going to do anything for his brand. One, and I'm hoping I'm not being too arrogant about it, he's going to lose the debate. Absolutely. There's nothing in it for him to do that. His whole narrative depends on not having this discussion. It's why they never have it. It's why they don't really talk meaningfully in any way about family law, about the realities of men trapped in miserable marriages. All these areas of topic is just like, no, the money line is worship God, get married, have children, be a good father. That's what it's about. And anything that challenges that mentality is not clickable for Andrew's audience. And it's not very helpful for Rollo's audience either. Rollo has a very large share of this, got a huge audience. He's doing quite well. But I was actually surprised he came on this podcast. And I don't think, honestly, that he wanted to, but sort of got cornered into it by Michael. Well, at least that's the way it seemed to play out. But I don't think there's anything in it for him to acknowledge this stuff or to talk about it, because it steps on so much of what they're selling. And I just don't think there's enough in it for them. If there was a way that it would turn into a really engaging debate that would expand audience, I think Rollo and Andrew Wilson would be here all the time. But the way things are with the nature of this conversation, talking about men setting aside female approval and focusing on self-actualization, focusing on their own interest and needs, their own progress in life, and really living a non-gynocentric life. Well, when you're gynocentric, you don't want to have that conversation. So yeah, that's my take on it.
All right, and I got one more super chat from GeoFascio, who gives us $4.99 and says, Paul, Shah, Brian, is Cristiano Ronaldo's surrogacy/single dad model viable for men wanting kids / legacy? Average men can afford it in Mexico.
You first, Paul, please.
I think yes. I think it's viable. I think, again, anytime you talk about procreation with women, you're in a legal area that you better check out very carefully. But I've got to be honest. I think that a surrogate, if you really want to have a child and raise a child, if that's what the desire of your heart and what you want to do, that a surrogate is a better option than your average woman. And I stress the word average. There are women, I think, that are suitable for pair bonding and child rearing, but they're a diminishing population. But if you can work your way into a situation where you hold all the cards, where you're the sole person responsible for that child and nobody can take them from you, as long as you're a decent parent, I would recommend that to a lot of men. Sadly, because part of the problem is, it's not like mothers are unnecessary, and they're necessary and important for more than just the act of childbirth. I think ideally, if we lived in an ideal world, you would want a mother for your child, but we live in a treacherous world with corrupt family courts and a rigged family law system. That's the world we actually live in. So pragmatically speaking, I think it's a viable option, and I've recommended it to a lot of men.
I think it definitely is an option, and I understand why men would elect to do that. My problem is, personally, I don't see myself doing that, and it's kind of for the reason you mentioned there, Paul. Like I would want, both parents and
Right.
in the child's life, because I feel like it's just so fundamentally important to the development of who they are as a person and their psychology and their emotions. And in case something happens to me, is there's at least someone else living that can watch them, especially if they're young. Again, it's an option, and I understand how it's becoming something more men are availing themselves of. I don't know if it's like the solution. I don't think it can. I don't know if like the mass of people can do this, because I do think it's important to have a family structure there. But again, Paul, the stuff you mentioned, I mean, it makes sense, especially for some people in certain situations. Like he brought up Cristiano Ronaldo, and he's in a very vulnerable situation when it comes to this. So I want to acknowledge that. And also, I believe he did say Brian, so maybe we can hear Brian's thoughts on this.
Yeah, let's do it.
Mine?
Yes. You're the only Brian here, dude.
Well, I guess I think I'm with Shah on this, more or less. I think that, yes, it's completely viable for men to become like a single dad. And there's like people that on the other channel that I work at, Honey Badger Radio, that are really big on pushing that. But I'm still in the camp of like, this isn't really about what's best for men or women, but for children. And so I'm more landing on the, ideally we would have two parents. And that's what I'd like to see. But if a man really wants kids and no women are, out there, and he thinks he can do it, like, be a dad and have a job and raise a child and give the child the appropriate amount of care and attention and support that the child needs, then I say go for it. But I'm in the camp of like, I can't have kids because I had cancer in 2017, but if I were to be in that like mode of like wanting kids, I definitely wouldn't do it if I didn't have a woman with me that was going to stick it out for the whole ride. And yeah, I do believe they're out there. I'm married one, so that's what I think. I don't know if that's a good answer, but I think that ultimately, there's a lot of like, when you look at the women's movement, for example, just as a contrast, it's all about liberating women from everything, from all responsibility, from having to raise children, from even like pregnancy itself, like the fundamental biological reality of being a woman. They're trying to liberate themselves from that, and I think it's causing a lot of suffering. I don't think that we win when we try to get men as liberated as women. I think that we need to I don't know. I think we need to reorient ourselves towards something that gives us purpose, and some of that has to do with duties. And I think that, yes, and no jokes there, I think that that's what makes people, when people are satisfied, is when they have like a specific thing that they are living for. And, you know, children is like the best of those things, I think. Our problem is today is that we've replaced children in the center of our world with women. And it's just not, that's why women are killing their kids. And we're paying them for it. So my thinking is, if you can pull it off, go ahead. I think that in the same way that fathers are absolutely crucial for a child's development, I think mothers are too.
You know, there's Warren Farrell did a lot of research on this for the boy crisis. And one of the things that he brought out in that was that if you look at the psychosocial outcomes for developmental milestones in children, they do just about as well from single father homes as they do from two parent homes. Single mother homes, it's terrible. They just do a bad job on their own. But I don't know if those studies take into account the first crucial couple of years in a child's life. Or like how many of the single fathers that they studied where the outcomes were good took over custody of the child when they were 7, 8, 9, 10, 15 years old. That could skew the results. I do think there's something there to the biology in this that can't be ignored. I'm not saying I don't think it can be overcome, and I still stand by the idea that it's better than the average woman has to offer, and certainly better than the family law system and our governance will ever offer, our politics. But so if you have a passion to have a child, if that's the focus of what you want in life, but you don't want to risk the woman taking the child away from you, probably the only way to do it is surrogacy. It's a sad reality. I don't like it. I'm with Brian and with Shah on this. Ideally, a mom and dad, imagine that, mother and father in the home for the durations of the child's young life until they're of age for self-sufficiency. That's the ideal that should be there. The problem is that's not the world we live in. And it's a tragedy. And I think children are getting robbed by this, at least the ones that aren't aborted.
Also extended family too. This is something that gets overlooked. Extended family from the nuclear family. But yeah, it's not like it was when I was growing up.
No. Nope. I grew up, divorce was rare. People still whispered the word. And now it's a badge of honor for women, depending on how much they take out of the settlement. Pretty sad. Well, that's a lovely note to end on.
I did get one more super chat just now.
Oh, good.
Maybe
I
it's
hope
a little
it's a
bit better.
happy one.
Yeah, it's Caesar Quintana for $20, and he says, "What's up, guys?" That's it.
Hey, Caesar,
What's up,
thank you
Caesar?
so much.
That is a happy one. I'm glad we.
Yeah, I tell
We
you
got one
what,
from
don't take
Caesar.
any more comments. If we can end with Caesar, I'll be happy.
Okay.
And it looks like that's it. Okay. We've been going at it a little over 2 hours here. It's been a great, enjoyable conversation. I want to thank you, Shah, very much, as always, for your perspective, which is just golden to bring in here. Thanks, as always, to Brian Martinez for religiously showing up here to make this thing work. It's why he makes the big bucks.
We are very much indebted to Brian.
Yes.
So much. And thank you, Paul, for having me again. It's
Oh, man,
fun.
it was my pleasure, and it won't be the last time. Reminder, everybody, next week on Wednesday, Repairing the Manosphere will be an interview with Dr. Hannah Spire at noon Eastern Time. So if you're a late sleeper, you may want to catch that one after it's recorded. But it ought to be a good discussion. This lady's got a lot of good things to talk about. I'm looking forward to the interview with her. As always, guys, hope you've enjoyed, even if you haven't, and we'll see you next time.
subscribe, and ring the bell. Support the channel. Stay strong.